I'm a 31-year-old man who has been married to my wife, a 27-year-old woman, for nearly 3 years. We've been living together even before tying the knot, and our marriage has generally been a happy one. I've never questioned her loyalty because I've never had a reason to. We've had our fair share of disagreements, but nothing extreme. I was confident that if my wife were ever unhappy, she would communicate it to me. So it hit me like a ton of bricks when I stumbled upon a series of overly friendly messages on her phone one day. Her phone was on the dining table, and I had picked it up to bring it to her bedroom as she had requested. A notification lit up the screen, and I couldn't help but glance at it. There were messages from someone named Kara, and they were of a highly personal nature. I didn't know anyone named Kara, and the nature of those texts immediately raised my suspicions. I brought her the phone in the bedroom, and when she opened it, she asked if I had seen her notifications. I lied and said no, but she mentioned that it was just a notification for a kid's game and that she felt embarrassed I had seen it. I assured her that I hadn't seen anything and left her to her phone. However, I couldn't help but study her expressions because my doubts were now eating at me. She continued to text Kara with a smile on her face, which only fueled my unease. Unable to shake off my suspicions, I eventually left the room and told her I'd be sleeping in the living room, citing some work I needed to finish. She didn't even look up from her phone when I grabbed a pillow and headed to the couch. Restlessness consumed me as I couldn't stop thinking about those messages and the worst-case scenarios that were playing out in my mind. I had never considered the possibility that she would cheat on me, but now I had my doubts. I let it go that night, but the nagging feeling persisted. I began checking her phone whenever the opportunity arose. I needed to put my mind at ease to know the truth. I wanted desperately for it to be untrue. But then, one day, I saw another text from Kara. It contained a time and place, along with nicknames and emojis that resembled a date plan. I knew I should have confronted her, but I was so furious about her potentially ruining our seemingly perfect marriage that a simple confrontation didn't feel like enough. Instead, I decided to go to the specified place at the designated time. She arrived a bit late, and right in front of the cafe, she kissed the guy. A hello kiss, but a kiss nonetheless. It was the kind of kiss you give your husband when you return from work. I recognized the guy. He was her colleague. I had met him a couple of times when picking my wife up from her office. I knew his name, and I knew for a fact that he was married. I was torn between wanting to storm over and confront them both, to cry my heart out, and maintaining my composure. I chose the latter, hoping to give her a taste of her own medicine. I bided my time, and it was excruciating to be in the same house as her, eating dinner together, sharing a bed, and engaging in conversations about anything while I knew she was betraying me. But I remained patient, determined not to let her get away with it so easily. Our tradition of hosting game nights with friends every other month was the perfect opportunity to carry out my plan, and I organized everything, just as we always did. She was always competitive at games, so our game nights were something she looked forward to eagerly. When everyone arrived, we started playing Pictionary. In the midst of the game, just before it was her turn, I slipped a note into the jar. As she picked it up, her expression shifted from joy to confusion, and then embarrassment within seconds. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, and in that moment, I decided to reveal everything I knew right there in front of our friends. Everyone was taken aback because, like me, they hadn't anticipated such a revelation from my wife. She pleaded with me to let her explain, and reluctantly, I agreed, curious about what excuse she would conjure. Through tears, she claimed I was jumping to conclusions, asserting that she was merely friends with her colleague. I remained calm, insisting she pack her bags and leave. Her demeanor changed swiftly. She admitted her mistake, but insisted it was unintentional. I couldn't fathom how infidelity could just happen without neglecting your spouse, but at least she acknowledged it. I calmly told her to leave, unable to bear her presence in my home any longer. I also informed her that I intended to speak to her colleague's wife, because he couldn't escape consequences either. Our friends, sympathetic to my situation, tried to console her. Despite my anger, I didn't want her to face this alone. Some friends offered her their guest rooms for the night, but she opted for a hotel. She accused me of humiliating her in front of everyone, insisting we talk when we were both calmer. Reluctantly, I agreed, even though I had little patience for her lies and fabrications at that moment. After she left, she persistently tried to contact me, but I ignored most of her calls and messages. I needed time to gather my thoughts. My wife had unraveled into a mess within a month. I did talk to her colleague's wife, who, too, had suspected her husband's infidelity. She revealed her plans to divorce him and suggested I do the same. I agreed, but it was far from easy. I had loved my wife for a long time, and we had been happy. We didn't have significant issues in our marriage, and yet she had chosen to betray us. About 2 weeks later, my wife, now living in a hotel, begged me to let her in and hear her out. I reluctantly allowed her inside, and she immediately burst into tears. She professed her love for me and admitted her mistake. When I asked how long the affair had been going on, she confessed it had lasted a year. My heart shattered, but my sorrow quickly turned to rage. I couldn't fathom why she had destroyed our otherwise happy marriage. She couldn't provide a single reason for her actions. She insisted on giving our marriage a second chance, but I was done. I told her to leave and not to contact me for a while. I needed time to think, to sort through the chaos she had caused. It's been 6 months since I asked my wife to leave. We've met a couple of times since, during which she apologized profusely, begging me not to divorce her. I was torn because I still loved her deeply. Ending our marriage was the right thing to do after her betrayal, but I couldn't find it in myself to move forward. Our marriage was in limbo. We lived separately, hardly speaking. I knew I had to end it officially because I couldn't trust her anymore. The trust I had once placed in her was irreparably shattered. She kept assuring me she wouldn't repeat her mistake, urging me to trust her again. I was considering giving her another chance when I received an email from her colleague's now ex-wife. She claimed my wife and her ex-husband were still in contact. I desperately hoped she was wrong, hoping my wife couldn't be that cruel. I asked my wife to meet, and, as usual, she began with apologies. I confronted her about her ongoing communication with the man she had the affair with. She hesitated, and in that moment I knew the truth. I urged her to be honest, and she confessed they had spoken when he was going through his divorce. She insisted they were just friends, but the little trust I had left vanished. With that admission, I realized I could never trust her again. There was no point in staying in a marriage where trust and unconditional love were lost. I informed her to expect divorce papers soon. She could take anything she still had in the house. Despite her tears and pleas, there was no other option. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness, relieved to finally end the turmoil, but saddened by the loss of what was once a loving relationship. Thankfully, we didn't have children. It made the process a little less painful. She left quietly, and although I didn't care if she went back to that man, I needed to let her go to move on with my life. I should be informed beforehand and not find out when I walk through the door. I expressed my concerns, feeling unsettled about the situation. My wife seemed dismissive, telling me I was overreacting and that my brother needed a place to stay temporarily. The next day, I decided to have a conversation with my wife about boundaries. I explained that while I understood she wanted to help my brother, I needed to be part of the decision-making process, especially when it involved our home. She countered, saying that it was just a temporary situation, and I shouldn't make a big deal out of it. I insisted that communication and mutual respect were essential in our relationship, and that decisions like these should be made together. As the discussion continued, my wife became defensive, insisting that she was just being supportive and didn't see the need for my involvement. I emphasized the importance of boundaries in maintaining a healthy marriage and family dynamic. We talked through our concerns, trying to find a compromise that respected both our relationship and my brother's situation. In the end, we agreed that in the future, we would discuss such matters before making decisions that affected our home life. While my initial reaction might have been perceived as an overreaction, The conversation allowed us to establish clearer boundaries and strengthen our communication as a couple. I firmly believed that I should have been the one to decide whether my brother stayed over. He had no right to call my wife and intrude without my consent. I insisted that he should have waited for my call, and I planned to talk to him about it in the morning. However, my wife brushed off my concerns, telling me to grow up and accept that he was always welcome in our home. Now my wife is furious with me, and I find myself stuck with my brother in the house, unsure of how long he'll be staying until he figures out his life. Already having 2 teenagers, I felt overwhelmed having another person, especially my adult brother, residing with us. I stood my ground, believing that he shouldn't be here, but my wife remained upset with me. Am I the jerk for asserting that she shouldn't have picked up my brother and allowed him to stay at our house? Update. I don't believe it makes me a bad person to think that an 18-year-old should be independent and not rely on family support. I expect the same for my children. They are supposed to have a job and save money to move out after graduating from high school. If they go to college, they can stay, but they are expected to pay for it themselves and contribute a small amount in rent. My wife doesn't agree with this and believes our children can stay as long as they need. I'm trying to help her see reason. As a child, I was never taken to zoos, museums, or out to eat. I went to a public school and wasn't allowed to participate in sports or activities due to financial constraints. I had to get a job as soon as I could. My parents were 16 when they had me, and even when they got older and had more money, I still didn't receive the opportunities my brother had. My brother received the best, while I got nothing. It's time for him to stand on his own. Yes, my children enjoyed activities like going to the zoo, parks, and museums, as well as participating in sports. However, those privileges were for my kids, not my brother. I couldn't understand why my wife would include him in these experiences. My brother has always regarded her as another mother, so I had to share her with him. Last night, when I got home from work, everyone was preparing for dinner. After the meal, I asked my kids to go to their rooms so I could talk to my brother and wife. I questioned my brother about his presence and why he felt the need to involve us instead of dealing with his issues independently. He explained that he needed to escape his home environment. He had just discovered that his girlfriend had cheated on him and was planning to leave. She blamed him for not marrying her or having a baby, which she desired deeply. I told my wife that what she wanted wasn't unreasonable and that my brother was being immature. I argued that if he could live with his girlfriend, he could marry her. My wife countered, saying that not everyone wants to be married and have children at such a young age, reminding me that he was an adult who needed to grow up. I expressed my displeasure with them making decisions without me and explained that this situation could have been resolved the next morning. There was no need for anyone to drive 2 hours or run away from home. I inquired when my brother planned on leaving, and he informed me that his girlfriend was moving out by Sunday, after which he would go back home. He still had 2 months left on the lease, so he intended to look for a smaller place to move into. I shared my reservations about him staying for that extended period, but my wife defended him, insisting he was my brother and a few days wouldn't hurt anyone. Reluctantly, I agreed, although I made it clear that I didn't like it. I felt cornered and uncomfortable with the situation, but I didn't want to make a bigger issue out of it. I still believed he needed to go home and deal with his problems independently. My brother thanked me, and we parted ways. My wife and I continued to discuss the matter, both feeling discontented with one another. "You're the jerk," she said. "He's an adult." Then another person chimed in, "Or are you leaving out a ton of info? You have some minor points. I don't like people staying at my house either, but it isn't just your house, and it's family. You didn't specify that there was a horrible drama or anything. Your post comes off as controlling and unpleasant." The discussion continued, with varying opinions. Some believed I was in the wrong, while others saw my point of view. It was clear that this situation had caused tension between my wife and me. The situation turned grim in 2020 when I lost my job due to having to homeschool our kids. We couldn't afford the rent, and 6 months later, we were evicted. My mother-in-law, who initially offered us 2 bedrooms, withdrew her support as soon as we became homeless. For 4 months, we lived out of our van with our kids until a homeless shelter opened up. During this time, both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law distanced themselves from us, showing little compassion. Despite our efforts to reach out, we were met with judgment from sister-in-law, who received her house after her father's passing and hadn't paid taxes in years. We were criticized for our life choices and were made to feel like failures because we were over 30, had 3 kids, and were struggling. Fast forward, we managed to turn things around drastically. We built a house from scratch, involving our kids, and gained invaluable experience. The outcome was perfect. Our kids were overjoyed to have participated in building their own home. We also started our own business, achieving this success without any help from my husband's family, despite their broken promises. Throughout this journey, I couldn't help but develop a bitter resentment toward them due to their lack of support. Recently, my mother-in-law, who is facing eviction herself after losing her retirement benefits, approached us asking to stay in our home if she became homeless. My initial reaction was to laugh at her audacity. My husband stood by my side, showing his resentment toward her for abandoning us in our time of need. She left offended, and later, sister-in-law criticized us, labeling us as trash for not allowing her soon-to-be evicted elderly mother to move in. I suggested a nearby nursing home for her instead. While some friends said my response was harsh, considering the way they treated us, I don't believe I am the jerk in this situation. Their lack of support when we needed it has created a chasm, and I find it hard to extend a helping hand now.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. "I will do my best." Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. "Did you not hear what I said?" "I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully." Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. "To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance." As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. "Still here?" Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick! What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.